A biker bar. Engines still ticking outside. Then the door opens. A child walks in alone, holding a drawing like it's his last weapon. He points at a man in the room and says, "This is who took my brother." The police didn't believe him. They said the kid probably wandered off. But the drawing hides a mistake. One detail the villain never meant to leave behind. And once the engines start, there's no stopping what comes next. Because some monsters don't realize they've already been found. Welcome my beautiful family and friends to my YouTube channel. Please click on subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. Thank you specially for sticking around to this very moment. Now back to the story. The engines outside hadn't fully cooled. They ticked and popped in the parking lot like restless animals, metal contracting after a long ride, heat bleeding into the morning air. Chrome reflected the pale sunlight. Rows of motorcycles stood shoulder to shoulder, scarred and proud, as if they'd arrived together and planned to leave the same way. Inside the bar, leather ruled the room. Vests stitched with patches. Heavy boots planted wide. Sleeves rolled up over forearms marked by road rash, old burns, faded ink. The air smelled like grease, coffee, and something sharp. Oil, maybe, or the faint echo of gasoline still clinging to jackets. Laughter moved in waves, deep and unrestrained, bouncing off the walls. Forks scraped plates. Mugs hit tables. A jukebox hummed low in the corner, drowned out by voices telling stories that always seemed to start with "You wouldn't believe what happened on the road." This wasn't a place children wandered into. This wasn't a place for hesitation, or fear, or softness. And yet, the door opened. Not slammed, not pushed hard. It opened slowly, like someone unsure whether they were allowed to cross the threshold at all. At first, nobody noticed. Why would they? The room was full of men and women who filled space without trying. People who'd learned over decades that the world moved out of their way when they walked into it. A single quiet sound didn't register against all that weight. But then the laughter thinned. Not all at once. Just enough for something else to slip through. A pair of sneakers stepped onto the scuffed floor. They were too small for the room. Worn at the toes. The laces mismatched. One shoe had a thin strip of duct tape holding the sole together, peeling slightly at the edge like it had given up trying to stay invisible. The jeans above them were a size too big, sagging despite the belt cinched tight, extra holes punched where none were meant to be. The boy followed. 10 years old. Maybe less, if you counted the way his shoulders sloped inward, like he was trying to take up as little space as possible. His hoodie hung loose, sleeves pulled down over his hands. Dark circles lived under his eyes, not the kind that came from staying up late playing games, but the kind that came from not sleeping much at all. He stood just inside the doorway, holding something with both hands. A piece of paper. Folded. Creased. Soft at the edges, like it had been opened and closed too many times to count. He didn't look around the room the way a lost kid usually would. There was no searching for a familiar face. No confusion. No hesitation. His eyes were focused, sharp in a way that didn't belong to a child. Like someone who had already decided what had to be done and was just doing it. A few heads turned. A biker near the bar tilted his head, brow furrowing. Another nudged his friend with an elbow, nodding toward the door. Conversation stumbled, then restarted, then stumbled again. The boy took a step forward, then another. He walked straight into the room, past the bar stools, past the booths, past the long table where half a dozen riders leaned back in their chairs, laughter dying in their throats as he passed. No one stopped him, not because they didn't see him, but because something about the way he moved told them not to. His grip tightened on the folded paper as he walked, knuckles pale. His breathing was controlled, shallow, like he'd practiced it. Like he'd told himself, "Don't cry. Not yet. Not here." He stopped near the back of the room, in front of a man who sat alone. The man looked up slowly, coffee mug halfway to his mouth. Scar down one cheek. Eyes that didn't miss much. The kind of stillness that came from paying attention for a living. He didn't speak right away. Neither did anyone else. The room seemed to hold its breath. The boy unfolded the paper. The sound was small, just a soft crackle, but it landed heavy in the silence. He smoothed it out carefully on the table, pressing the corners flat, as if the image mattered enough to deserve respect. Then he spoke. His voice didn't shake. That was the part that unsettled everyone the most. "This is the man who took my twin brother." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They sat in the air, heavy and undeniable, like a truth that refused to be ignored. For a moment, nobody moved. Not a chair. Not a fork. Not a breath. The man at the table looked down at the paper. So did the others, one by one, drawn in despite themselves. It was a drawing. Crayon and pencil. Rough lines, but deliberate. Careful. Too careful. A white van filled most of the page. Not a child's vague idea of a vehicle, but a specific one. The kind you only draw when you've stared at something long enough to burn it into your memory. The front left headlight was shaded dark. Broken. The fender curved inward in a strange shape, a dent like a crescent moon frozen in metal. On the side of the van, a logo, unfinished, but recognizable enough to suggest plumbing or repairs. Letters half-formed. Colors chosen with intention. In the corner, written in blocky, careful handwriting, was a partial license plate. Not guessed. Remembered. The room shifted. Someone swallowed hard. Someone else muttered a curse under their breath. This wasn't a kid showing off a drawing. This was evidence. The boy stood there, hands clenched now at his sides, like he'd already given up the one thing holding him together and wasn't sure what came next. "He doesn't talk much," the boy added quietly, eyes fixed on the paper. "My brother. He gets scared easy." That did it. Something broke in the room. Not loudly, not visibly, but deep. The kind of fracture you feel more than see. A place like this was built on toughness, on survival, on learning to take hits and keep moving. But this was different. A 10-year-old had walked into a room full of people who looked dangerous to ask for help because the people who were supposed to help hadn't listened. Because the clock was ticking. Because somewhere out there, a man in a white van thought he'd gotten away with something. The boy finally looked up. His eyes scanned the faces in front of him, not pleading, not begging. Just asking one question without words. "Is anyone here going to care?" The silence stretched. Every second that passed felt wrong. Like time itself was complicit. And that's when it hit everyone at once. This wasn't just a story. This wasn't just a kid with a drawing. This was a line being drawn. Between those who looked away and those who didn't. Between comfort and action. Between letting monsters move freely and standing in their way. The danger was real. Not loud yet. Not chaotic yet. But real. And somewhere, far away from this bar, a clock was counting down. 1 second at a time. If you believe kids shouldn't have to fight monsters alone, hit like right now. Comment "Protect the innocent" if this already makes you angry. Because silence is a side. And choosing to care is choosing who you stand with. The silence in the biker bar didn't break right away. It settled. Heavy. Uncomfortable. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes you aware of your own breathing. Every pair of eyes kept drifting back to the boy, small, straight-backed, standing far too still for someone his age. Gabe hadn't sat down. He stayed standing beside the table, like he didn't trust the chair not to disappear beneath him. Like sitting might mean he'd stayed too long. Like someone might decide he didn't belong here after all. One of the bikers finally spoke, voice low, careful. "What happened, kid?" Gabe swallowed. Up close, it was easier to see how tired he was. Not sleepy tired. Worn tired. The kind that settles in when fear has nowhere to go. His fingers kept worrying at the hem of his hoodie, twisting the fabric tighter and tighter as if anchoring himself to the moment. "He's my twin," Gabe said. That word, twin, shifted something in the room. Twins weren't just siblings. They were mirrors. Two halves of the same beginning. "He's autistic," Gabe continued. "Lucas is. He doesn't talk much. He doesn't like loud places. He gets scared when things change." The bikers listened. No interruptions. No jokes. No one checked their phone. "He likes the swings at the park," Gabe said softly. "The ones by the trees. He counts when he swings. Always the same number." Gabe paused, breath hitching just slightly before he forced it steady again. I went to the bathroom, he said. Just for a minute. I told him to stay where I could see him. A minute. Every adult in that room knew how short that was. How fast time could betray you. When I came back, Gabe said, he was gone. The word didn't come out dramatic. It came out flat, like something that had already been said too many times to too many people who hadn't reacted. A biker near the bar clenched his jaw. Another shifted in his seat. What did the police say? Someone asked. Gabe let out a small, humorless breath. They said he probably wandered off. The phrase landed wrong. Too neat. Too dismissive. They said kids do that. Gabe went on. Especially kids like Lucas. They said he might come back on his own. His hands curled into fists now, knuckles whitening. They didn't put out an Amber Alert, he said. They said they needed more proof. They said they didn't want to scare people. The room stirred. A low murmur rippled through the bikers like distant thunder. And I kept telling them, Gabe said, voice rising just enough to betray the fear underneath. I saw the van. I saw him take Lucas. He pointed at the drawing again. That's why I drew it, he said quickly, like he needed them to understand. I didn't want to forget. I didn't want anyone to say I was wrong. The man with the scar leaned closer to the paper, eyes tracing the lines again, not as a skeptic now, but as someone recalculating. You're in foster care? He asked gently. Gabe nodded. We've moved a lot, he said. Different houses. Different people. They're nice, but they don't always listen. The police talk to them more than they talk to me. That did it. The injustice crystallized in the air, sharp and undeniable. A kid reports an abduction. But he's young. He's fostered. His brother is autistic. So the urgency disappears. Someone behind Gabe muttered. Unbelievable. Another voice answered. Darker. No. Happens all the time. Gabe looked up at that. His eyes weren't angry. They were tired. I tried to explain, he said. I told them about the headlight. The dent. The way the man drove away fast, like he already knew which street to take. He hesitated, then added, almost apologetically. I'm good at remembering things. No one laughed. Of course he was. He had to be. I went back to the group home, Gabe continued. I drew it right away, before it could fade. I kept thinking if I could show them exactly what I saw, they'd believe me. His voice cracked for the first time then. But they just kept saying, we'll see. We'll see. Not we're moving now. Not we're treating this like an emergency. Just we'll see. Gabe blinked hard, but the tears didn't fall. He refused to let them. So I came here, he said. That finally earned a reaction. Here, one biker repeated. Gabe nodded, glancing around the room, suddenly aware of how out of place he must look among all the leather and scars and steel. I heard people say you don't ignore things, he said. That you notice stuff. That you don't back down. The words weren't flattery. They were a gamble. A room full of grown men and women, some with reputations that made others cross the street, being asked to care because a system didn't. The bikers exchanged looks. Not the kind filled with bravado or excitement. The kind filled with something heavier. Realization. If the police weren't moving, if the alert wasn't sent, if the paperwork was still sitting on someone's desk, then time was being wasted. And wasted time, in a situation like this, wasn't neutral. It was dangerous. One of the older bikers leaned back, arms crossed, eyes never leaving Gabe. They didn't believe you, he said quietly. Gabe shook his head. They believed me enough to write it down, he said. Just not enough to hurry. That sentence hit harder than any accusation could. Believed but not acted on. A choice. The room changed after that. Not loud. Not dramatic. But something fundamental shifted. Because now it wasn't just about a missing boy. It was about a system that decided some kids could wait. About how easily urgency disappears when a child doesn't fit the picture people want to care about. A biker stood up slowly, chair scraping the floor. That van, he said, nodding at the drawing. You're sure? Gabe didn't hesitate. Yes. You didn't guess? No. You didn't hear someone else say it? No. I saw it, Gabe said firmly. I memorized it. The biker exhaled through his nose, then looked around the room. If this kid's telling the truth, he said, then someone out there thinks he got away with something. No one argued. And if that's true, another biker added, voice low, then waiting is how kids disappear. Gabe stood very still as the adults around him did the math. Not out loud. In their heads. Every minute that passed without action. Every excuse wrapped in procedure. Every assumption that a foster kid's word wasn't enough. The terrifying conclusion settled over the room. If they didn't act, nobody would. Gabe felt it too. He hadn't known how to say it when he walked in. But it was the reason he'd come. The reason he'd stepped into a place he was probably warned to avoid. Because being ignored was worse than being afraid. Because doing nothing felt like letting the man in the van win. Gabe took a breath. I don't want him to think we forgot him, he said quietly. No one answered right away. They didn't need to. The choice had already been made, whether they admitted it yet or not. If you can't stand when the system ignores kids, comment do better. Subscribe if you believe silence helps villains, not victims. Because indifference isn't neutral. And believing a child shouldn't be controversial. The change didn't happen with a shout. It happened with silence. The kind that falls when a decision has already been made. A chair scraped back. A coffee mug was set down untouched. Someone stood, and then someone else. The room shifted from a place where people listened to a place where people moved. Phones came out first. Not casually. Not to check messages or scroll. These phones were raised with purpose, screens already glowing, cameras snapping photos of the drawing from different angles. Close-ups. Zooms. Crops. Someone adjusted the lighting so the dent on the fender showed clearer. Another straightened the paper, smoothing a crease so the license fragment could be read cleanly. The drawing stopped being just a piece of paper. It became a signal. Outside, engines started. One by one at first, then overlapping until the parking lot roared to life. The low thunder of bikes filled the air, vibrating through windows and bone. Exhaust curled upward, sharp and hot. Helmets snapped shut. Gloves tightened. Riders mounted up like this was something they'd done 100 times before, because they had. But not for this. Never for this. Inside, voices were clipped now. Focused. Send it to the group chats. County pages first, then truckers. Who's closest to the industrial strip? I've got a guy at a gas station off Route 9. The drawing moved faster than fear ever could. Within minutes, it was everywhere. On phones in nearby towns. On screens behind gas station counters. On tablets mounted inside long-haul trucks rolling down the interstate. Truck stops were the first net. They always were. Places where vehicles passed through without drawing attention. Where drivers noticed details because noticing kept them alive. A dent here. A broken light there. A van that parked too far from the entrance. A man who kept the engine running when he didn't need to. White van, plumbing logo. Front left headlight out. Fender bent like a crescent. Questions traveled faster than the bikes themselves. A cashier squinted at a phone screen, then frowned. A mechanic wiped grease off his hands and leaned closer. A trucker stared at the image for a long second too long. Yeah, someone finally said. I've seen that. The response didn't come with relief. It came with urgency. Warehouses were next. Long, low buildings on the edges of town where shadows stretched even in daylight. Places built for loading and unloading. For staying unseen. For doors that rolled shut and didn't open again unless someone wanted them to. Bikes rolled slow through industrial districts, engines idling low. Riders dismounted and walked fences, boots crunching on gravel. Eyes lifted to security cameras, some dead, some blinking with life. One rider stopped and pointed. A camera. Still powered. Someone made a call. The hunt tightened. Security footage didn't lie the way people sometimes did. It didn't assume. It didn't minimize. It recorded. And when the video loaded, there it was. A white van sliding into frame like it belonged there. The front left headlight dark. The fender curved inward in that unmistakable crescent shape. A collective stillness fell over the riders watching the screen. That's it, someone said. Not excited. Not triumphant.
Certain.
Time stamps were checked. Angles replayed. Frames paused and zoomed. The van parked behind a building. The driver stepped out, tall, movements sharp and restless. He disappeared into the shadows, then returned. 11 minutes later, the video ended. No sound. No answers. Just confirmation. The plate fragment came next. A partial match at first. For characters visible, when the van turned just enough for the camera to catch it. Someone cross-checked it against the drawing.
Perfect.
A child hadn't guessed. He'd remembered. Phones lit up again. Messages flew. Coordinates.
Times.
Directions of travel. Heading east. No, south, then cut over. Industrial lots near Commerce Road. Social media caught fire. Not the careless kind. The deliberate kind. Posts shared into missing child networks. Community watch pages.
Trucker boards.
Private groups where people paid attention. The drawing, now cleaned up, enhanced, outlined, spread across counties like a warning. The net tightened with every share. And the villain didn't know it yet. Bikes moved in pairs now. Never too close. Never alone. One rider pulled into a gas station and killed the engine. Another circled the block slowly, eyes on the road. A third watched from across the street, phone held steady. A man inside the station stared at the image, then at the road beyond the window. That van was here, he said quietly. Couple nights ago. Real late. Anything stand out? The man hesitated. Driver paid cash. Didn't look anyone in the eye. That was enough. A timeline formed. Tuesday night. Industrial district. Back lots. Cash payments. The picture sharpened. And with clarity came pressure. Because now there was no doubt. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a kid wandering off. This was someone moving deliberately and carefully, which meant he knew how to hide. And people who know how to hide don't stop unless they have to. Engines revved again. The hunt accelerated. Bikes fanned out across access roads and side streets. Not chasing yet. Watching. Logging. Recording. Every movement was documented. Every sighting timestamped. Someone spotted tire tracks behind a fence.
Fresh.
Wide treads. Commercial. Photos snapped.
Sent.
Marked. Another rider checked a supply warehouse, talking casually with the owner. No accusations. Just conversation. Anyone renting space out back? Guy with a white van. Pays cash. The words traveled through the group like electricity. Found it. Not yet proven. Not yet confronted. But close. Very close. The bikes didn't rush in. They waited. They filmed. They stayed back far enough to leave no excuse. The van sat there under a tarp, barely covered. Like it didn't quite believe anyone was looking. The broken headlight peeked out. The dent caught the light. The plate fragment matched. Confirmation stacked on confirmation until denial was no longer an option. The villain was close. And worse, he was moving. A message crackled through the group. Lights on inside the building. Another followed. Engine just turned over. That changed everything. Because a moving target meant decisions. Do nothing and risk losing him. Do too much and ruin everything. The bikes came alive again. Engines roaring in unison. Not a chase. A shadow. Following at distance. Cameras rolling. Positions held. The van pulled out onto the road. The net closed. Not with force. With inevitability. Every turn was logged. Every second counted. Every eye stayed locked. The drawing had done its job. It had started something that couldn't be undone. And somewhere inside that van, a man who thought he'd been careful was about to learn something dangerous. He wasn't invisible anymore. If you believe evil shouldn't get a head start, share the story. Comment no hiding if you want the truth exposed. Because the fastest way to stop darkness is to shine a light together. Night didn't arrive gently. It came fast, like someone flipped a switch and pulled the daylight out from under the road. The sky darkened to bruised blue, then to black, and the edges of everything sharpened. The white lines on the asphalt, the glow of headlights, the reflections in shop windows that flashed by too quickly to recognize. The van's engine turned over. Low at first, then louder. The sound carried in the still air, unmistakable, mechanical, intentional, not the idle hum of someone loading tools or waiting on a phone call. This was movement. Engines on, a voice said into the group channel. No panic. No shouting. Just fact. Bikes eased forward one by one, engines responding like they'd been waiting for the signal all along. Headlights cut clean cones through the dark, never closing in too much, never falling too far back. They weren't hunters chasing prey. They were witnesses. The van rolled out of the lot, tires crunching over gravel before hitting pavement. Its brake lights flared once. Hesitation. Then it merged into traffic, smooth and confident, like it had done this before.
He's moving, someone said.
And just like that, the chase began. Phones came up. Not shaky. Not rushed. Mounted. Stabilized. Recording. Then the red appeared on screens.
Live.
One tap changed everything. The chase wasn't private anymore. It wasn't just bikes and a van on a dark road. It was thousands of eyes, then tens of thousands, watching from living rooms, bedrooms, bus stops. People leaned closer to their screens as the feed spread, shared again and again with captions that carried urgency like a pulse. White van fleeing. Possible child abduction. Recording for safety. Comments exploded faster than anyone could read. Where is this? Call the cops. Oh my God. The van accelerated. Not recklessly. Not yet. Just enough to test the space behind it. The bikes adjusted instantly, spreading out, maintaining distance. No headlights flashing. No revving to provoke. Just steady pressure, like gravity pulling from every direction. The road narrowed. Streetlights thinned. Trees closed in on both sides, shadows swallowing the shoulders of the highway. Inside the helmets, breathing slowed. Adrenaline was there, hot, sharp, but controlled. The kind you learned to live with if you wanted to survive long rides and longer nights. Stay back, came the calm reminder. Keep it clean. The van turned suddenly.
Right.
Then left. The bikes followed, smooth as water finding a channel. The live feed tilted and corrected, viewers watching the road bend and stretch like a ribbon under headlights. The comments turned frantic. He's running. He knows. Please let the kid be okay. The van's speed crept higher now. Not full flight, but close enough to feel it. The night pressed in. Every mile stretched longer than the last. Every second felt like something could snap, someone could swerve, a tire could blow, a mistake could cost everything. Then, ahead.
Red. Blue.
Flashing. Police lights cut through the darkness like a promise and a threat all at once. The van hesitated. Just for a breath. Brake lights flared bright red, then dimmed. The driver weighed his options. Everyone watching felt it. That moment where a bad decision could still be made. Then the van slowed. Turn signal blinking, almost polite. It pulled onto the shoulder. The bikes rolled to a stop far back, engines idling, cameras never turning away. The live counter surged as more viewers flooded in, drawn by the sight of flashing lights and the shared sense that something irreversible was about to happen. The pause that followed was unbearable. Officers stepped out of their cars carefully, hands near their belts, posture rigid. The night swallowed sound again, leaving only the thrum of engines and the faint crackle of a police radio. Driver, keep your hands where we can see them. The words carried through the darkness, sharp and measured. The driver's door opened slowly. Too slowly. A man stepped out tall, shoulders tight, baseball cap pulled low. His hands rose, palms open, but his body stayed angled, protective of the van behind him. The cameras zoomed. Viewers held their breath. An officer moved toward the back of the van. Another circled wide. The doors at the rear were still closed. Metal. Unyielding. Seconds passed. 10. 20. Time stretched until it felt unreal. Then the officer reached for the handle. The sound of the latch clicking echoed louder than it should have. The doors swung open. And the night changed. Inside the van, a small shape, curled inward, wrapped in a blanket that was too thin, too tight, like it had been pulled around him in a desperate attempt to disappear.
A boy. Alive.
His eyes were wide, reflecting the red and blue lights like trapped stars. His body shook, not violently, not loudly, but with the kind of silent fear that came from holding it in for too long. An officer froze, then moved fast. "I've got a juvenile," his voice cracked through the radio. "Approximately 10. Responsive." The words hit like a wave. On the road, helmets dipped. Shoulders sagged. On the screens, comments blurred into tears and exclamations and prayers typed with shaking hands. "He's alive. Oh, thank God. Please, please be okay." The boy didn't cry. Not yet. He clutched the blanket, fingers locked so tight his knuckles were white. His gaze darted between uniforms, lights, shadows. Every movement a potential threat. An officer knelt slowly, lowering himself to the boy's level. "You're safe now," he said softly. The boy didn't answer, but his breathing changed. Just a little. The cameras kept rolling, not invasive, not close enough to steal the moment, but present.
Documenting.
Protecting. Making sure this couldn't be rewritten later. An ambulance arrived, lights softer, slower. Paramedics moved with care, voices low, hands gentle. The boy was lifted, wrapped more securely now, his small frame dwarfed by adult arms and equipment. As he passed the line of bikes, his eyes flicked toward the headlights. He didn't know who they were, but something in the way they stayed back, still, quiet, watching, seemed to register. The van sat empty now, doors open to the cold night air. No hiding left, no shadows deep enough. The monster had run, and the world had watched him fail. If predators deserve nowhere to hide, comment justice. Hit like if you believe monsters should always be found, because fear thrives in darkness. And tonight, the lights stayed on. The road went quiet after the sirens faded. Engines that had thundered with purpose minutes earlier now idled softly, one by one shutting down until the night reclaimed its stillness. The flashing lights moved farther away, shrinking into the dark until they were nothing more than distant color against the horizon. The chase was over, but the moment didn't feel finished. The van sat empty on the roadside, doors still open like a confession no one needed anymore. Cold air drifted through it, stirring the blanket that had wrapped a terrified child just moments before. The space where fear had lived felt smaller now.
Exposed.
Across the road, the bikers stood quietly. No cheers, no raised fists, no celebration, just silence and relief heavy enough to make shoulders sag. Lucas was alive. That truth moved through them slowly, like warmth returning to fingers after the cold. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. An officer approached, his posture less rigid now, the sharp edge gone from his voice. "He's going to be okay," he said. "Physically, at least." That was enough. Someone nodded. Someone exhaled a breath they'd been holding for hours. Someone else looked away, wiping at their face before anyone could notice. The villain, now just a man in handcuffs, was guided toward a patrol car. His head was down. No speech. No excuses. The world that had shrunk around him was finally too tight to escape. But no one watched him for long. He wasn't the point. He never had been. The cameras stopped rolling soon after. The live feeds ended not with a dramatic sign-off, but with quiet words, "He's safe." And that was enough for the thousands who had watched. The bikes didn't ride together afterward. They peeled off in different directions, heading home under a sky that was beginning to pale at the edges. Dawn crept in slowly, softening the sharp lines of night. The adrenaline drained away. What remained was weight, because saving a child didn't erase what he'd been through. And everyone knew that. The hospital was quieter than the road had been. Fluorescent lights hummed. Shoes squeaked faintly against polished floors. Somewhere down the hall, a machine beeped steadily, a reminder that life continued in measured rhythms. Lucas lay curled on the bed, smaller than the blanket that covered him. His eyes followed the movement of the room carefully, cautiously. He flinched when a cart rattled past the doorway. His breathing hitched when a nurse spoke too loudly. But he was alive. And he wasn't alone. Gabe sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. His presence was enough, steady, familiar, grounding. Every so often, Gabe lifted his hands and signed something slow and deliberate. Lucas watched his hands like they were anchors. The doctors spoke quietly outside the room. About dehydration, bruises, trauma that would take longer to see and longer still to heal. They spoke in careful tones. But inside the room, something else was happening. Lucas reached out. His fingers wrapped around Gabe's sleeve, gripping tight, as if the world might disappear again if he let go. Gabe didn't move. He stayed. Because he always had. Later, when a social worker came in and explained what would happen next, tests, questions, arrangements, Gabe listened without interrupting. He'd learned how to do that. How to wait. How to endure. But when she finished, he asked just one thing. He won't have to go back, right? Gabe said quietly. To places where no one listens? The woman paused. Then she said, No. We'll make sure of that. For the first time since he'd walked into that biker bar with a folded drawing, Gabe let himself believe it might be true. The news called it a rescue. The internet called it a miracle. People argued in comments about heroes and villains, about systems and failures, about who should have done what sooner. But none of that reached the hospital room. Inside, there were no headlines. Just two brothers. Days passed. Then weeks. The villains stayed locked away, reduced to paperwork and court dates and cold walls. His name faded from conversations. He stopped mattering. What mattered was the slow work. Therapy rooms with soft lights. Quiet mornings. Hands learning to relax again. Lucas didn't speak right away. No one pushed him. He communicated in the ways he knew, signs, gestures, drawings of his own. Crayons returned to his hands, but now they sketched different things. Lines that weren't vans. Shapes that weren't sharp. One day, he drew a motorcycle. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. Gabe watched him color it in, chest tight with something like hope. For so long, his drawings had been about survival. About warning. About holding on to details before they vanished. Now they were just drawings, as they should have been all along. Years later, the memory of that night would still live inside them. Not as a nightmare, but as a turning point. Lucas grew slowly into himself. Words came in pieces at first. A few sounds. A whisper. Silence in between. No one rushed him. When his voice finally came fully, it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. On his birthday, surrounded by people who had chosen him, not out of obligation, but out of care, Lucas spoke clearly for the first time since the abduction. He looked at a photograph on the wall. A line of motorcycles. A small sidecar. Two boys wearing helmets that were a little too big. They came, he said. The room froze. They came when I was scared. No one spoke after that. They didn't have to. Gabe sat beside him, older now, shoulders broader, eyes still sharp in that familiar way. He smiled, not wide or loud, but real, because he knew something now. Something he hadn't known when he stood in that biker bar, clutching a drawing and hoping someone would listen. Being small didn't mean being powerless. Being young didn't mean being invisible. And silence, when broken, could change everything. A crayon drawing had spoken when adults wouldn't. Strangers had chosen action over comfort. And a child who refused to be ignored had saved his brother. Not by force, but by courage. Stories like this don't end when the danger stops. They end when meaning takes root. When people remember that cruelty survives on indifference, and justice begins the moment someone decides not to look away. This wasn't a story about bikes, or chases, or even villains. It was about choice. The choice to listen. The choice to act. The choice to stand on the right side when it mattered. If you stand against cruelty, subscribe. This channel tells stories that don't stay silent. Comment, I stand for justice. If you're not siding with evil, share this so more people choose the right side. Because every like, every comment, Every share is more than engagement. It's a statement. And statements change the world. Stay with us. More stories like this are coming, and every one of them matters. If you enjoy stories told like a movie, click on subscribe for more powerful stories.